Right, so welcome everyone to the Himalayan Webinar Series, module number 4. We'll be talking about food and shelters today, which will be kind of complementary to yesterday's session where we discussed the hiking gears required to traverse the different Himalayan terrains discussed in module 2 and safeguard yourself against the high altitude weather. We still have a couple more interesting sessions lined up in the next couple of modules on alpine-style independent hiking, maps and navigation to find your own way in the wilds. My favorite topic will be number 7, minimalism and fast hiking, followed by a few tips on exploration of unknown areas and route planning in the Himalayas. From chapter 9 to 15, we'll be zooming in on the various types of regions in the Western Himalayas, sharing some of the experiences and the beautiful places discovered in those sites. Okay, small reminder that as of today, we are going live every day at 8 o'clock. You can join via mobile or desktop at the tiny URL /HimaWeb. Sessions are recorded and posted on my Instagram account, first 10 minutes. The full archive is available on the blog, ultrajourneys.org. Requesting to mute yourself during the session. We can have a small Q&A at the end of every session. All right, let's get started. Food and shelters. So today we'll be discussing about following topics about water and hydration, food, how you plan your food during your exploration journeys in the high passes, how do you manage cooking, what about hospitality, shelters, camping, and then again Q&A. Let's start with the most important thing, water or hydration. As a hiker, you burn a lot of calories hiking in the high passes with steep elevation gain. Will drain a lot of water from the body, even though you might not realize it due to the comfortable climate at higher altitudes. But it's very important to stay hydrated, especially more so because taking sufficient water will also help you during the initial week of acclimatization at higher altitudes. Unfortunately, both like in the Himalayas, again, mostly on the touristic sites, like say Marka Valley or even in the Sahyadris, when I hiked 200 forts in November and December, I saw a lot of both tourists as well as local people drinking bottled water, which is very sad. During my internal journeys, I will never touch a bottle of water, always depend on natural water sources. You got streams, you got melting snow and glaciers, which will give you sufficient water sources actually that you don't even have to carry water with you. As long as you hydrate yourself whenever you come across a water source, mostly you'll be fine. I see a lot of Europeans, especially in Ladakh, carrying water filters with them, which again, I don't think is really required as the water at these high altitude sources, if there are no villages, of course, on top of you are pretty much pristine. How do you plan your water? Hydration is very important, but at the same time is of course very heavy. I see a lot of hikers carrying 2-3 liters equals kilograms of water, and then basically carrying that water all the way till the next stream, which is basically meaningless. The rule is always whenever you have a clear water body near you, like a running crystal clear water stream, you drink from them, you hydrate yourself pretty well, you drink sufficient water to fill up the stomach, and then basically you keep always planning or estimating how much time will it be required to hit the next water source. To do that planning, obviously, you need to be aware of the topography of the landscape around you, where the next stream will be located, where are the side valleys. For this, of course, it's important to have a map, topographic map, which we'll be discussing in the one of the upcoming chapters. Maps, map reading and navigation. One point on main versus side streams. Main streams in the main valleys, especially as you come down from the passes to lower altitudes, the water will pick up force, especially in the late afternoon or peak summer when there is peak meltwaters of the glaciers and the snow. And the force of the water typically tends to drag along a lot of soil, so the water becomes muddy. So my kind of plan will always be to hydrate myself from the side streams rather than the mainstream. Water presence, of course, highly depends on the season. Are we at the beginning of spring, where a lot of the water will still be frozen, snow and glaciers? Or are we somewhere in peak summer, where there will be a lot of meltwater? Water planning again becomes very important as you cross passes, as you go to these higher altitudes, crossing over the ranges. The amount of water there will be less than in the valleys, obviously, down in the, say, below 2,000–3,000 meters in the alpine meadows and the forests. So as you plan those high altitude pass crossings, you will always have to make sure that you have sufficient water along with you, depending on the number of hours or days even it will take you to cross a certain pass and get back down to a lower altitude where you will find water again. Same with campsites, only suitable campsites, in addition to finding flat space where you can pitch up, will be the presence of water, obviously. One other interesting thing is that water doesn't have to be running always. Even when you walk in the snow with no running water around you, you can easily melt some snow by putting it in a bottle, empty bottle, and shaking it ferociously to melt the snow, even if you don't have cooking gears with you. Food planning. So here again, you can use the bulk approach of what I see most expeditions doing, say in Ladakh. They basically carry 3 weeks of food with them, loading like 5 horses with 50 kilogram per horse, mainly food items in addition to shelters and stuff, but basically carrying heavy loads of food over an extended period of time, which I think is pretty meaningless, given the fact that at least every couple of days you will be coming across some settlement, some small village, some even mountain tribe or gujar, where you can easily resupply your food. So food planning for me will always be about understanding how far it is, not in terms of distance, but in terms of days, in terms of time, to reach the next settlement, where again you can resupply your food and only carry the required amount of food to make it to the next village. So food planning basically is all about route estimation. So here you can see like the first 20 passes which I crossed in the summer of 2018. For every pass, basically, couple of critical parameters are mentioned. So as this last village in the current valley and the first village that I reached after crossing the pass in the destination valley. Altitude of the pass is important, as well as the starting and finishing altitudes of the from and to village, which will give you the total ascent and the total descent, more than the distance. From the last village to the first village, it's the climbing that will require a lot of effort, burn a lot of calories, and take its time. And then basically the main data, the main property for every pass will be the number of days required to go from one village to the next village crossing the pass. So based on this number of days, I will carry the required number of food with me, typically 2–3 meals per day, complemented with some snacks. A few words on fresh foods. So whenever you get the opportunity, either with shepherds, Gujar mountain tribes, or small settlements, villages, it's always good to have freshly prepared homemade food, as you'll burn a lot of calories, obviously, climbing those steep mountains in the Himalayas. So nutrition and energy is very important, basically, when you burn like 5,000 to 8,000 calories every day. Even more when you fast hike the Himalayas. So fresh food basically allows you to regain the energy lost of the day and to keep you also going over longer durations if you plan multi-week or multi-month journeys. Whenever you go through villages, as I mentioned, you basically resupply your food that you're gonna pack up for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days until you get the next village. And obviously you will also make up for the lost calories in the previous section. Many of the foods in the village you can actually pack up for the first 1 or 2 days. If a pass crossing, in my case again as a fast hiker, a pass will never take 90% of the time, never take more than 1 or 2 days. So you can actually pack up any of the food here like chapatis, parotas, chow mein, momos along with you in the high altitude. Climate, food typically stays good for 24 to 36 hours, so nothing easier than to pack up food in the last village until again you can have a hot meal in the next village that you will touch after crossing the pass. This fresh food packed up for 1 or 2 days is then complemented with a lot of, maybe that's a personal thing of me, but I tend to carry a lot of chocolates and especially peanuts to basically make up for the lost sugar and salts as I fast hike through the passes. As we go beyond the second day, on day 3 and beyond, 3, 4, 5, 6, I typically start cooking as packed food obviously will not stay good for longer days. So for cooked food again, instead of using things like Maggi, which of course is lightweight and easy to prepare, I suggest you go for something more nutritious. Like my typical favorite here shown is white oats. White oats is pretty lightweight, easy to make. You just take 100 grams of white oats, cook it with some water for 2 minutes, and you will have something very nutritious, a lot of energy to keep on going. I typically cook only twice a day to optimize the time, morning and evening. And during the day, I mostly rely again on some fruits or peanuts or chocolates I carry along with me. How do you cook? You can either carry a canister with you with fuel, which will again increase the weight, easily 1 to 1.5 kilogram. Or you can simply use naturally available fuel sources like in the lower Himalayas, like Uttarakhand, Himachal. As long as you're not above the forest line, above 2,500 to 3,000 meters, you'll be in the forest and you can have a lot of firewood available. This, of course, is only recommended when you're solo or with a few people, not, of course, when you're going to cook and burn a lot of wood for a big group of 40, 50 people. And even when you're actually going in the higher altitudes, like say above 4,000 meters in Zanskar, Lahore and Ladakh, you don't have vegetation anymore, you don't have firewood. But there it's all a matter of collecting, say 2 kilometers before you settle down on the campsite, collecting dry dung from either yaks or cattle or horses used by hikers, and sprinkling this with a little bit of kerosene to make a well-sustainable fire to cook. In addition to whatever you carry along with you, you'll also find fruits in the wild, especially mid-August till September. It's the apple season in especially the districts of Kulu and Kinnaur. So carrying 5, 6 apples with you in your backpack will give you so much of energy that you will not eat whatever other food you're carrying. You'll find wild strawberries near the forest line, and then even in the high altitude deserts of Zanskar here, in some places I was able to find these small apricots. So again, good sources of fresh, natural, nutritious foods. In addition to that, again, you can also look at the wilds with a little bit of understanding the knowledge of the local people. You will quickly get to understand which are the edible plants available both in like alpine meadows at lower altitudes, as well as here the second plant shown, which is available even in the high altitude deserts of Zanskar and Ladakh, and provides both hydration and nutrition. Mushrooms, of course, you need to be careful. You need to understand very well which are the edible ones versus the non-edible ones. In addition to all that options, having your own food, finding stuff in the wild, you will always have the fallback option of the mountain tribes as well as the shepherds in the remotest corners and the higher altitudes of the Himalayas. Out of my experience again this summer, spending 4 months covering 120 high altitude passes, I would easily say that 50% of the time, 50% of the crossings I come across hospitality on my route, where again, as soon as people will see you, especially again as solo and smaller groups, they will welcome you with open arms to treat you on some fresh goat milk tea or some freshly made rotis over the campfire as you stay with them. I have a small video here on food and cooking, which I took on my 99 pass this summer. I suggest you look at this offline as it's a little bit longer, but also actually gives a nice overview on how to manage food on your Trans-Himalayan journeys. Talking about shelters, the second part of this presentation. So as you plan these pass crossings, right, you go from deeper and lower altitudes in the valleys. From the villages, you go to the forest, where you will meet the Gujar, the mountain tribes. Then again, you go higher to the alpine meadows, where you'll find the shepherds grazing their herds. You'll also find shelters, both open and closed shelters. Then again, beyond that, you will come into the no vegetation zone of rock and ice, crossing the passes, sometimes snow-covered. And then again, going through the same sequence as you lose altitude on the other side of the pass. So keep in mind that, of course, none of these options will be available on all the passes. But again, if you talk about routes like ancient migration routes used by shepherds or ancient traders in some of the valleys between Uttarakhand and Tibet, or some of the passes crossed by villages, you will definitely come across Gujar settlement, shepherds, and numerous shelters, which will be ideal campsites for you to spend the night. So in the villages again, especially the last villages in the valleys, deep inside, away from civilization and money-minded cities, you will come across very friendly villagers, which will be, in many cases, very hospitable, offering you food and shelters. Beyond those lost villages, beyond the lost roadheads, beyond electricity and beyond mobile networks, inside the forest, you will find the Gujars staying in very primitive shelters, along with their cattle. People are again extremely friendly and will not let any opportunity pass by, especially in the less touristic places, to invite you into their home in case you settle down at the end of the day near one of these settlements. Going beyond the Gujar, then in the higher altitudes, you come across the shepherds, which will either be staying in open shelters, that's shown on the right here in the Linky Valley of Lahore. They have these homemade blankets and clothes, woolen blankets, which will keep them warm. Or in pretty high altitude, cold climate, they will also have these rock igloos, closed shelters in which they stay. So these places are also suitable places to spend the night, as again, you have shelters, you're pretty safe from nocturnal predators, and they protect you from the cold and possible rain in the night. If you don't meet anybody along the way, you'll still find shelters, which are either used, temporary shelters used either by shepherds as they migrate across the passes, or used by some of the villagers or the hikers along these routes. So again, a shelter is always preferred to camping, as it provides better protection against cold wind in the night, against rain, obviously, to keep yourself dry, and also an element of safety that you're not exposed in the open and more vulnerable to predators roaming in the high ranges. If you don't find any of the above, then you'll fall back to camping, using your own the gears, the shelter you carry along with you. So one thing I want to make very clear here is that rule number one is always to camp outside the wind. You find some place, some tree, some bushes, some rocks, some overhanging boulder, or some shelter basically, where you cut the wind. The wind, especially the cold night wind at high altitudes, is the one that is going to drain your body heat the whole night and possibly cause hyperthermia, which can be life-threatening. So it's very important that instead of pitching up a tent in the middle of an open meadow, exposed to the wind the whole night, it's completely meaningless. It's a complete waste of carrying 3-4 kilograms of tent material with you, pitching it up in the open with obviously no other use than cutting the wind. Instead of that, it's better to hike more lightweight, more comfortable with less weight, and find an intelligent wind-covered spot. Camping again, out of my experience, 120 campsites this summer, I will never use a tent or even my BV light with BV, which protects me from the weather elements for 90% of the time. As long as you get the wind, a sleeping mat and a sleeping bag or a quilt will be sufficient. So here you see a campsite at 4,900 meters just before crossing the Kangla Glacier on the way from Lahore to Zanskar. Pretty cold nights, but again, as you cut the wind and have a proper, of course, sleeping mat protecting you from the cold underground, as well as the most important thing I would say is a quilt or a sleeping bag, which is suitable for 0-degree temperatures. You don't really need to pitch up any tent. The quilt you see here is basically a sleeping bag which is open at the base. The isolated materials that are used to make sleeping bags only will maintain their thermal properties if they are not compressed. So a sleeping bag on which you actually sleep on top is meaningless again at the base of you, because the part of the sleeping bag on which you sleep will be compressed and will not have any thermal properties. So a quilt actually optimizes the weight further by just covering you at the top and the sides, and of course the feet, and keeping the bottom part open, which where you can directly sleep on the mat. This quilt has been an amazing experience for me on 120 high altitude campsites. Quilt was gifted by me by a nice friend from Manali, Huzefa, who runs a small company, bluebolt.in. Huzefa is an expert on thermal materials and has basically asked me to evaluate his quilt in so many different weather conditions over those 4 months last summer, and it was a very positive experience. So if you're looking for some good materials, you can consider going to his website and checking out the available options for you. If you don't find a shelter, I mean, to cut the wind, then you will have to sleep in the open, or again, if you don't find a covered cave or a covered boulder that protects you from possible rains that night, then of course you will have to put up a tent, or again, in my case, I prefer a 500 gram BV, super lightweight, which will also protect me extremely well against the cold night, even the rains. I've slept in this configuration here, shown in the slides. In the rain, ice cold rains at the advanced base camp of Stokkangri, the highest peak in that range at around 4,900 meters. It was pretty cold at night, but again, as you layer up intelligently with a proper sleeping mat below you, you get into your puff jacket or your fleece, preferably a hoodie that protects the body heat from leaving the head. Snuggled in your sleeping bag or quilt, and again layered up with your BV, then you'll be pretty warm no matter where you end up. The configuration shown here is much lighter than any sleeping bag and bulky sleeping bag combination. You have a 500 gram BV, a 600 gram quilt, a 250 gram hoodie, and a 200 gram mat, which is hardly 1.3 kilograms compared to a 4-5 usual tent and sleeping bag shelter configuration. Another nice video shot here in a cave during my summer expedition below the Margu Pass, where I got stuck somewhere in the rain. I suggest you look at this video offline. I'll be sharing the slides on my website, ultrajourneys.org. Explains nicely on the various types of gears to put up a proper shelter. Voila, that's it. Another short 15-20 minutes session on food and shelter. So thanks for joining. If you have any questions, you can drop it now in the group chat. Hope it was useful and hope to see you guys again tomorrow for the next session. I'll keep the